Innovation is everywhere. In energy, in education, and in healthcare. And in how we create a more sustainable, resilient world. But in Qatar, innovation isn't just present everywhere. It's a national priority. And as the world navigates a rapidly evolving global economy, Qatar is preparing for what lies ahead by investing in the future today. With sustainable economic growth at the heart of its third national development strategy, Qatar is accelerating towards its National Vision 2030. And that vision is backed by action. Qatar is a country that's actively transforming itself into a hub for innovation, forging global partnerships, and nurturing homegrown talent. And on this Innovation Day, in partnership with the Qatar Research, Development and Innovation Council, we acknowledge the ecosystem that Qatar has created. One that brings together thought leaders, creators, and change makers from around the world. This is a road to 2030, and innovation is leading the way.
Ignore the noise. If you're a long-term investor, ignore the noise.
Risk avoidance ends up in return avoidance. We have to knowingly, intelligently take risk for profit.
President Trump is a deal maker. We know that. And that, of course, scared the market. And so you're getting back to, okay, this is a storm, but we'll get through the storm.
If you've been watching the world, I think everyone recognizes that a strong America is not just good for America, it's good for the world.
What we really like is data centers in the U.S.
The best and single most exciting investment opportunity is to do secondaries, private credit.
Where do you think the downside risks are going to come from?
I do think that risk assets, whether it's equity markets or credit markets, are too complacent, and that the soft data will eventually catch up with hard data.
We have a saying in Arabic, I'll say it in English, that real estate can get ill, but it will never die.
I thought sovereign wealth funds would be the right next generation partner for sports teams.
This region today is a significant player and can actually host major events, and not only just host them successfully, but rather add value to that event.
Please welcome to the stage Bloomberg's Jumana Bersechi.
Good morning again, everybody. Welcome to the third and final day of the 5th Qatar Economic Forum. Well, today's the grand finale. It's Innovation Day, where we will be focused on big tech and the game-changing startups building the future. We'll discuss where innovation is headed and who is leading the charge. Before we begin, a special thanks to our Innovation Day sponsor, QRDI Council. We would also like to thank our official partners, the Qatar Ministry of Commerce and Industry, Qatar Media City, our culture sponsor, Qatar Museums, our innovation sponsor, Qatar Research, Development and Innovation Council, our premier sponsors, Qatar Investment Authority, Qatar National Bank, our knowledge sponsor, McKinsey & Company, our participating sponsors, IDA, HSBC, Investment Promotion Agency Qatar, Qatar Financial Center, Qatar Free Zones Authority, Qatar University, our airline sponsor, Qatar Airways, our connectivity sponsor, Ooredoo, and our tourism sponsor, Visit Qatar. And a reminder that the Wi-Fi network is QEF 2025. You can also continue to engage with us on social media using the hashtag Qatar Economic Forum. And with that, let's get started. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Engineer Omar Ali El Ansari, the Secretary General of the QRDI Council.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Peace be upon you.
It is a pleasure to welcome you today to Innovation Day at the 2025 Qatar Economic Forum. This forum has become a global stage for what matters most. And today, as we gather under the banner of the road to 2030, transforming the global economy, we are reminded that transformation is not only about speed or scale, it's about direction. It's about who we include, what values we uphold, and how we choose to direct our ingenuity in a time of disruption and opportunity. Last year, from this very stage, I posed a set of questions. Many of you carried with you throughout the day. Questions not of engineering, but of ethics. Can we democratize access to innovation rather than deepen inequality through it? Can we build technologies that heal and empower rather than divide and dominate? Can we lead with purpose, not just with power? 12 months later, the world has given us powerful reasons to keep asking these questions. We've seen AI systems become more capable, more autonomous, and more deeply embedded into how we work, govern, and live. And we've seen a parallel rise in public concern about who controls these systems, how are they used, and what values they encode. In 2024, the European Union's AI Act marked the world's first comprehensive attempt to regulate artificial intelligence. Though not without its critics, it represented a global turning point, a sign that societies are beginning to draw clearer boundaries around innovation, governance, and accountability. In biotechnology, we witnessed landmark investments, including multi-billion-dollar deals in areas like obesity and liver disease, demonstrating how science is reshaping human health. But these breakthroughs also raised enduring questions about equity, access, and affordability. And in Africa, despite a global capital slowdown, startups raised over $2 billion, not through scale alone, but through bold ideas, grassroots leadership, and resilience. A reminder that innovation is not the sole domain of the global north, but a global, distributed force that must be nurtured inclusively. Here in the GCC, the innovation agenda is no longer conceptual, it is operational. Governments and industries are acting with clarity and ambition, reimagining sectors from energy to logistics, from digital infrastructure to health. In Qatar, this ambition is structured by two national pillars: the Qatar National Vision 2030, which charts our path to an advanced knowledge-based society, and the third National Development Strategy, which transforms that vision into real policy, institutional reform, and targeted investment. But ambition must be accompanied by architecture. The measure of success is not in our plans, but in the ecosystems we build, the talent we develop, and the outcomes we deliver. At the QRDI Council, we see our role not as the center of innovation, but as a bridge between national priorities and global ingenuity. Through our Qatar Open Innovation Programme, for example, we launched with 22 national partners over 50 innovation calls around the world in critical sectors like healthcare, energy, AI, and beyond. These calls attracted more than 1,000 proposals from all around the world, with 20 breakthrough projects now advancing, each designed to generate local value, deliver real outcomes, and build capability across the ecosystem. We've also scaled InnoLight, our national innovation platform, now connecting over 480 organizations and over 5,000 projects, creating the visibility and velocity needed to move from ideas to impact. Just this week here at the forum, we marked another step forward, signing an MOU with Qatar Airways to begin shaping an avionics innovation cluster. It's an early move, but a meaningful one, another example of how we are mobilizing national stakeholders to co-create the industries for tomorrow. And within QRDI itself, we have adopted the very tools we advocate, deploying AI modules to enhance peer review, guide decisions, and assess program performance. Just as importantly, we're building capacity across the ecosystem, equipping innovators and researchers, policymakers and institutional partners with the skills and foresight needed to innovate not only effectively, but ethically. These conversations matter, because transformation is not only about building new systems, it is also about re-examining the foundations on which those systems rest. So as we move through today's discussion, from AI to biotech, infrastructure to startup ecosystems, I invite you to carry forward the same spirit of critical optimism that grounded us last year. Let us celebrate what innovation makes possible, but let us also decide consciously what it should be for. And as we shape that future, let us return to the questions we began with. Will innovation deepen inequality or expand opportunity? Will it divide us or help us heal? Will we be remembered for our power or for our purpose? The answers will not be written by machines. They will be written by us. Thank you, and I wish you a meaningful and inspiring Innovation Day.
Ladies and gentlemen, as I like to say, welcome to technofeudalism. This is no longer capitalism.
The underlying code of all AI companies was always open source. This, I believe, is yet another sign that capitalism is dead at the hand of cloud capital.
But above all else, it is a world in which we will be able to imagine an authentic democracy.
Please welcome to the stage Yanis Varoufakis, former finance minister of Greece, for a conversation with Bloomberg's Michal Hussein.
Good morning, everyone, and a warm welcome to you, Yanis Varoufakis. And I think that this particular conversation that we are about to have is very fitting for this final day of the forum as we prepare to say goodbye and look to future events, because I think this will be very different, if not entirely different, to what has underpinned many of our discussions so far. So here at QEF, we have talked about growth areas, about good investments, about risks and barriers. But this is going to be a conversation with someone who believes the following: that capitalism is now dead, in the sense that its dynamics no longer govern our economies, and that it has been replaced with techno-feudalism. So it is the thesis of economist and former Greek finance minister Yanis Varoufakis. He has put it in this book, Techno-Feudalism, What Killed Capitalism, which is out now. And Yanis, you are very welcome to QEF, and I think you're going to challenge us a lot with what you're going to say. So before we get into the heart of the argument that you've put forward in the book and elsewhere, I want to take you back 10 years to the moment where you were in the global headlines. You were the Greek finance minister exactly at this point 10 years ago. A few weeks later, in early July 2015, you ended up resigning. It was an intense time because, as many of you will remember, it was the moment, well, the ongoing saga of the Greek financial crisis, and you were trying to have Greece's debts restructured. I wondered what the link is between what you lived through at that time and what you are so exercised by today.
Well, Michelle, thank you so much for asking all these questions. Thank you for the invitation to the Qatar Economic Forum. Look, let's go 10 years back. The only reason why I found myself in government was because the Greek state went bankrupt. It had gone bankrupt 10 years before. The people of Greece invited somebody like me to try their hand out. But let us not focus on Greece, because it wasn't a Greek financial crisis. It was a European banking crisis which begat the euro crisis.
It was the long tail, if you like, of 2008 and the financial crisis.
Exactly. It all starts in Wall Street, as it always does. Like 1929 began in Wall Street, 2008 was our generation's 1929. The banks of Germany and France discovered, to their great horror, these huge black holes after the subprime crisis. And then You will remember Dubai had a sovereign debt crisis, then it went to Greece, then it went to Ireland, then it went to Portugal. Okay. What was the real issue at the time? What was the real issue at the time was that after the collapse of Wall Street in 2008, in 2009 in London, in April, under the auspices of Gordon Brown, the UK Prime Minister then, the great and the good leaders, including Prime Ministers, Presidents and central bankers, got together and they decided to refloat finance. So we had a massive quantitative easing program, essentially printing money to refloat finance, while at the same time there was no coordination on fiscal policy. Indeed, whatever coordination there was, it was of an Austerian version, fiscal contraction. So when you contract aggregate demand and pump all these trillions into the Western economy, what you create is an incongruity, because there's a lot of money sloshing around in the financial sector, but industrialists, entrepreneurs, do not want to invest because they can see the low levels of demand. So what they do is they take the money and they plow it back into the financial sector, share buybacks and so on. The only entrepreneurs, capitalists, who invested a good chunk of the $35 trillion that was pumped through quantitative easing out between 2009 and 2022, the only entrepreneurs who seriously invested in new machinery were the big tech, Silicon Valley tech leaders. And that gave rise, and this is the connection with what I'm saying in this book, to a remarkable transformation that humanity has never seen before. I truly mean that. I know that every generation wants to feel that we are on the cusp of a fantastic transformation. You know, we all have this delusion. But I believe that between 2010 and 2025, we had such a transformation. And allow me just to say what that transformation is. We have a new form of capital. Capital has always been, since time immemorial, since Paleolithic times, you know, when humans fashioned a hammer or a plow. What is a plow? It's something you create, you produce this machine to plow the land to produce something else, a produced means of production. That's what the steam engine was, which brought about the first industrial revolution. That's what electromagnetism, you know, generators and electricity grids and telephone grids were towards the end of the 19th century. That brought about the second industrial revolution. Between 2010 and 2025, we have a new form of capital. Because what lives in here, ladies and gentlemen, is a machine. It's not just what's in here, but all the networked machines that are connected to this. Satellites, the carbon fiber cables, the algorithms, the server farms, all that. I call this cloud capital because it lives supposedly on the cloud. It's not on the cloud, it's on Earth, and it's inside our oceans. What does this do? What does Amazon, or the Google, or the Meta algorithm do? It doesn't produce anything. What you buy on Amazon has been produced elsewhere. It hasn't been produced by Amazon. What it produces is a remarkable power to input and infuse desires and thoughts into your mind. So it's the first time we have machines that do that which once upon a time advertisers, human marketeers, orators, preachers, politicians, poets did, which is to change our mind, to modify our behavior. This is now automated. So anyone who owns concentrated quantities of cloud capital has an immense power. And just very, very briefly, in order to end this long-winded answer, think about Alexa. Alexa is this little contraption that Jeff Bezos sells you to connect to Amazon and to the internet. And you feel that it is your slave. You say, Alexa, order this book for me, or switch off the lights, or whatever, right? But essentially, it's an interface with this cloud capital belonging to Jeff Bezos, and you're training it to train you, to train it better, to know what you want, to give you good advice, to win over your trust. I don't know about you, but when Amazon recommends a book to me, I always want to read it, and I never regret it. Similarly with Spotify, when it recommends music to me, I actually like it, usually, and sometimes I love it.
Because it knows you very well.
I have trained it to train me to know me.
Isn't that progress, Yanis? That is
of course
the advance of technology.
But at the same time, it is a source of major crisis. Why? Because the moment it wins my trust, it can say to me, oh, buy this electric bicycle. And I say, okay, click, I buy it. And then this electric bicycle comes to me bypassing every market. Once upon a time, a brilliant advertiser could convince me that I need to eat a Big Mac that I really shouldn't be eating. I didn't need it, I didn't want it. But it convinced me. But I had to go to McDonald's to get it. Now it comes directly to me, bypassing every market, and Amazon keeps up to 40% of the price. That's rent. And any economic system which is founded on rent, not profit, is a clear and present danger for the marketplace.
Okay, but people are making
because this
profits
money is coming out of a cyclical flow of income.
Okay, but so you're casting the tech giants essentially as not being producers and not adding value. Well, but they are enabling other businesses, aren't they? Someone has made that bicycle, someone has earned money from it being shipped to you. And if we look at another example, Google, their algorithms, okay, they change the whole time, and that is a terrible thing for businesses who one moment benefit and the other moment find themselves low on the search engines. But they also enable people to find things that are useful, whether they are products or services or merely information.
That's why we all use it. If you take away my phone from me, I'm dead.
So they are
There's
adding,
no doubt
but
about
that's what I mean, they are adding value.
No, they're not adding any value. They're extracting value. They're very clever at being useful to us, making us be absolutely dependent on them, in order to extract. We both mentioned, Michelle, the electric bicycle. I love it when I press a button on the electric bicycle, one that I actually enjoy riding too, comes to my home. But think of the producer of this electric bicycle, and I don't mean just the worker that has worked on the assembly line, but I'm talking about the capitalist as well. He or she has to pay 40% to Amazon. This is the equivalent, that's the connection with feudalism. Under feudalism, what gave you power was property rights over the land. You owned the land and you could charge rent. And the great the great transformation of capitalism was that you moved away from wealth being concentrated in the hands of people who were lucky enough to inherit land, to entrepreneurs, to people who actually put everything together in the production process with old-fashioned capital as a produced means of production. But now, one of the reasons why our central bankers are having such a difficult time rebalancing our economies, we have inflationary pressures, and at the same time, if they don't keep adding to aggregate demand, there is a danger of falling into stagflation. One of the reasons is, when you've got about, this is my estimation, about 30% of GDP in advanced economies, and increasingly in developing economies, is siphoned off in terms of rent. Remember, David Ricardo, the great banker and economist and politician, at the turn of the 18th to the 19th century, wrote a whole book called The Principles of Economics, of Political Economy, in which he lambasted the landlords because their rent was impeding the development of markets and entrepreneurship. And he was asking that, he was simply worried, and I think he was correct, that when a large chunk of GDP goes into rent, then the marketplace and our capacity to accumulate productive capital shrinks. This is David Ricardo, 1800s, early 1800s. I think that he today would be absolutely appalled by the manner in which this amount of wealth, think about, Meta, Zuckerberg's Facebook and so on. You know that only about 1 to 2% of their revenues goes to salaries? Because all of us, every time you post something on Instagram or Facebook, every time you post something, you're adding to the cloud capital of Zuckerberg. And this is free labor. Now, you may enjoy it. Of course you enjoy it. That's why you're doing it.
Well, you don't think about it most of the time.
But you are contributing free labor, which does not come back to the circular flow of income.
But Yanis, most of us have agreed to that contract, and we've ticked the terms and conditions often because we want the service for free.
Indeed. But if you go back to the feudal era, the vast majority of the peasants believed that it was a good and fair system. They even enjoyed life. We have a very negative view of feudalism. If you go back to the actual literature of the 16th century, 17th century, people they didn't work very long hours. They had their rituals. They had their, they had lots of holidays. It's not clear. I mean, sometimes when the landlord overdid it in the rent extraction game, they rebelled and chopped off their heads. But, the fact that we consent to something does not take away from the economics of it and from the reality that we are essentially undermining the capacity of our macroeconomies to reproduce themselves in a manner which is not degenerative.
Okay, so the rent idea is if going back to your Amazon example, if the rent is 10% rather than 40%, does that fundamentally change your objection? I.e., do you object, could you accept Amazon getting something like that for the service it is providing, for what it is enabling? Is it the amount that bothers you?
It's not just the amount. Because, you see, once you have control of this cloud capital, whether you are a nice person or not a nice person, whether you're Jeff Bezos or, some saint, the incentives are ever so powerful to extract more and more. Because, as we know, from politics, from society, from families, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely, right? This is a remarkable power that you have if you own that machine. And so let me give you an example of the things that happen. So Amazon, or Google for that matter, or Uber, they entice you to get in as a seller, as a producer. If you are a driver of a car, they entice you. Uber gives you good rates to drive. Amazon invites producers to sell through Amazon, giving them, extracting a very low percentage for them. But once you're doing really well by selling your services or your products through Amazon, through Uber, through Airbnb, and so on, the incentive is there for them to downgrade you. So you know what Google does with publishers. Initially, they're very high up on the search list, then they are pushed down, and then they're asked to pay more money, and there's a process that a friend of mine and a very astute observer of what I call technofeudalism, Cory Doctorow, has referred to as NCTification. This is the natural incentives within these big tech companies. Once they lure you in there, both as a consumer, a user, and as a producer, to extract more and more from you. And therefore, you have a systemic process of extraction, which is macroeconomically highly dangerous. And this is not just for the United States and for Europe. Did you know that in countries like Indonesia, for instance, millions of small-scale kiosks and retailers have been taken over by the Amazon conglomerates and the various other cloud capitalists of that region? So you see this extraction process depleting the resources of actual producers globally. So my job is to alert people to this.
Okay. Do you use these services?
All the time. All the time. But you see, I don't,
What, with gritted teeth, or what is...
No, I don't believe in individualistic acts of, vanity, rebellion. That is, what is going to change if I stop using my phone? The world is not going to become a better place. I think that these machines are a great tribute to the human spirit. So take AI. You have AI programs, as we speak, that design antibiotics which can kill bacteria that kill people. Now, that needs to be celebrated. So I don't have a problem with the machinery. I don't have a problem with the code. I have a problem with who owns these.
Okay, but maybe that was made
codes.
possible by the 40% what you would call rent.
It has been made possible, but at the same time, a lot of other activities have been made possible. For instance, Amazon in the United States uses exactly the same algorithms that design successful antibiotics in order to surveil workers in the Amazon warehouses and use a mathematical statistical program for predicting the probability that Joe or Kathy is going to talk to somebody and that this discussion may lead to unionization in the particular warehouse, and if the probability exceeds a certain threshold, either they're fired or they shut down the mothball of that particular warehouse in order to prevent unionization. So there are many different uses. So for me, it's not what these machines do. That I have no problem with. My problem is who owns them. And there is exorbitant power in owning Twitter, for instance, or owning Instagram, or owning TikTok. It is utterly inconsistent with any concept of liberal democracy.
And you know that Elon Musk joined us here at the forum 2 days ago, and one of the things he would like to do is to have a payment system within X to give it another dimension. And I'm interested in what you think of that, because I know that you look to China and you see positives in the WeChat app, for example, which is a very all-consuming app. But isn't that another example of a tremendous monopoly power? So if that is the answer, then why would a payment system within X and extra dimensions to services like that not be welcome as well?
Well, interestingly, when Elon Musk purchased Twitter, remember, something like 44 billion, the whole of the press was dumping on him. What a stupid, purchase that was. I thought it was a brilliant purchase. Because exactly, back then, and it's actually in the book, I explained why he bought Twitter. He wanted an everything app. He wanted to create his own WeChat. And for those of you who don't know, WeChat is a Chinese application that does everything that our Western applications do, from Netflix to Twitter to this, but also it offers you an opportunity to make free payments independently of where you have your bank account, as long as it is in one. And Elon Musk was trying, or is trying, to do with X that which Zuckerberg failed to do with Facebook. Remember, he was going to introduce his own currency, the Libra, or the Libra, and Wall Street killed that. Wall Street is trying, as we speak, to kill Elon Musk's version of WeChat. Now, I think that there are two important points to make about this aspiration of Elon Musk. The first one is that the public out there really want it. Because who wants to pay commission to their, the Bank of America, to JP Morgan, to Barclays Bank, and so on? And why should these banks, when they have a zero marginal cost for our transactions, charge us for it? And they charge us for essentially allowing us to use our own money. And this is preposterous. So this is a rent that has to go. And Elon Musk could be sitting here and saying, yeah, you see, I'm against rent. I want to create a free payment system through X. Yeah, but he wants to control it himself. And we know this, that any private system of monetary transactions is the first step towards a major crash, a major crisis. Because we can never trust a privateer with our money.
In that, are you on the side of Wall Street rather than Musk?
No, what I'm saying is I believe in a third way. I, for instance, would very much welcome the Fed issuing its own digital wallet. Imagine if you could download, if you were in the United States, your Fed app, or in the European Union, your ECB app. And you could, put your money in there, ask your employer to pay your salary there, if you want to, totally voluntarily. And imagine if you were to collect the overnight interest rate of the central bank, which is always much higher than what commercial banks. This would be a tremendous step in the direction of cultivating more competition in the financial sector.
It would be like your PayPal or equivalent as well, or your Apple Wallet, that it would be where you make
wouldn't need the Apple Wallet anymore, because you would have free payments anywhere in the world using your central bank app. By the way, the bankers already have that, because private banks, commercial banks, have accounts with the Fed. Now, the Chinese are doing that. The only reason why the United States cannot do this is because Wall Street is going to kick and scream. I know that Christine Lagarde and the ECB wants to do this for the euro, and it would be a great financial innovation, but the banks in Frankfurt and Paris are going to be all over her if she dares do this, so they are trying to contain it so that you can't have more than 1,000 or 2,000 euros in it. essentially the bankers want their monopoly. They shouldn't have it. They should not be allowed to have it. So I'm against an Elon Musk-owned cryptocurrency or payment system. I'm against WeChat because I don't believe that we have the right to create yet more exorbitant power in the hands of an individual. But at the same time, I do believe that we should democratize and socialize these digital payment systems. I don't believe in going back to cash. I believe in digital payments. We should own them collectively. Because, Michelle, we create money collectively. It's a mistake to think that the central bank creates the money. You know, in every advanced economy, only about 3 to 4% of money has been created by the central bank. The rest is created privately. Every time a bank extends a loan or an overdraft facility, it creates money. This is immense power. And I do believe that in democracies, this power should be democratized. Okay. And the technology gives us an opportunity to do that. So Elon Musk opens a way for us to do that which he doesn't want us to do.
Okay. It's very useful to have got both your diagnosis of the problem and at least one or some of your solutions for the future. We only have a minute left, so leave the audience here with one action point. You're still going to use these apps, we're all still going to use these services, but what would you like people here to take action on?
Well, if you are the mayor of a city, or if you play an active role as an active citizen in your municipality, in your region, what about suggesting that you, create a socially owned competitor to Uber, Airbnb, to Google, and to Amazon? Why should these rents end up at the Cayman Islands, through Ireland usually, being owned by big tech, the big tech oligarchy, who, on the one hand, they're very small people, and they deserve to be rich, but they don't deserve to collect 30% of global GDP simply because they have monopoly over us. We can differ politically between rightists, leftists, centrists, and so on and so forth. But I don't think we can disagree that having a monopoly over the most powerful form of capital, which is so concentrated in two loci, in Silicon Valley and around Shenzhen, that does not make for a stable world, that poisons our democracies, and it even intensifies the clash between the United States and China, making this world a much more existentially challenged place.
Okay, that's a very sober note to end on, but it's why you're here. Thank you for making us think, and Yanis's book is widely available. Yanis Varoufakis, thank you so much for being with us. Thank you.
Please welcome to the stage Samia Buwaza, Group CEO and Managing Director of Multiply Group, Chris Farmer, Founder and CEO of Signal Fire, and Henry B. Nguyen, Chairman of Phoenix Holdings, for a conversation with Bloomberg's Francine Lacroix.
Hello, everyone. Panelists, thank you so much for joining us. We have 20 minutes exactly to try and understand from a tech perspective, a tech investor perspective, what AI means. And I'm still amazed at how many big chief executives that I speak to that say, I know AI, I have many AI people that help me, but I don't fully understand the impact this has on me, my staff, and my company in the next 5 years. So first, let's start here. What does AI, Henry, mean to you? There's like a number of things. Is it difficult to have a hard conviction on where AI goes in the next 5 years?
Well, first of all, the way I see AI is being able to process an intense amount of data, information, to be able to direct it towards a very specific question or solution that you're searching for. And obviously so many advances have been made in recent times just because we've gotten to the point where our computing power is reached the point where we can crunch loads and loads of data and be able to give you responses in a timely manner. But all of you, if you've seen ChatGPT, there's certain things that you can obviously get an instantaneous answer. But there's some things that even that model is still having to figure out how to get your answer and compute. And obviously high-intensive sort of computational needs like graphics, video, etc., takes more. So even advances today like Google's VO3 is an amazing advance in terms of how we're moving so fast in all dimensions of AI.
And Henry, just so that everybody knows, basically Phoenix Holdings, focuses on technology, financial services, sports, and media. So do you invest in AI, or do you also use it to make the best investment decisions?
So we're in a unique situation because we're in an emerging market in Vietnam. And obviously, we're trying to keep up with all the sort of major technological trends that are obviously transforming the world. Vietnam itself is just a fast emerging economy, but at the same time, it sees an opportunity in AI in terms of being able to leapfrog into the next generation of technologies.
Okay, so Chris, basically you're the chief executive of Signal Fire, and this is a venture capital firm. $1 billion is what you raise of fresh capital to back AI companies.
Correct.
So how do you choose who to back?
So we are the first venture firm actually built on an AI platform. So I founded the firm about 13 years ago, and from day one, we've been actually practitioners of using AI. So we actually track more data on startups than anyone in the world, and use that to track about 650 million people, process where people are spending on different applications, and then use that to target what may be the best opportunities.
Is it difficult again to have conviction on one thing, because there's so much and there's so many players and they keep on changing, frankly?
So we've been more concerned about the infrastructure layer, that it's rapidly commoditizing and that the pricing has been dropping by orders of magnitude each year. So it's a tough time to be at the infrastructure layer, but a very interesting time to be at the application layer, where so much data is sitting in silos inside every type of organization on the planet, where AI can bring that into a pool that can then, over time, be used to take more action. And so we see the land grab around aggregating that data and the concept of data gravity and data network effects as a sort of core investment thesis.
Samia, how do you use AI first at Multiply? So basically for the investments that you look at and the companies that you buy.
So Multiply does two things, right? We invest in companies, and also after we invest, we move them to our operational arm, in which we start integrating them into our platform in the sectors that we operate in. At the investment stage, for the last maybe few years, we've been doing legal, financial, technical due diligence, as we should, but we've recently included AI and cybersecurity that falls under technical due diligence, because it's important for us when we invest in a company to know that this company is optimizing its output and the way it operates. Once the investment is done and moves to our operating group, we use AI across several touch points. First of all, at a board level, we've recently introduced MAI, which is an AI board observer that enhances decision-making, executive decision-making at the level of the board, and also brings more transparency and compliance to the shareholders. We've also integrated multiple AI tools across our financial, legal, recruitment departments, and we've seen a lot of efficiency come out of that. At this level, we've counted efficiency in terms of man-hour, and we've seen 140,000 man-hours saved at this level. But more importantly, so that's for the shared services at Holdco company. But more importantly, across each vertical, it has become more and more interesting and easier for us to use AI tools in order to really extract value and create good savings. In our media vertical, for example, we have 4 companies. Now they talk to each other, now they sell each other's inventory, and also with this AI integration, hyper-targeting the client when we really use the data that we have, anonymize it, and use it to hyper-target clients in media, we've created tangible 17% uplift on the EBITDA of this particular vertical. So this is in general. Also, we have agentic AIs. We have initiatives that empower and actually demand employees to start learning how to better integrate AI tools in their operations.
Could I ask each of you actually what AI utopia looks like? Again, like in 4 or 5 years. I mean, the advancement is so fast. We don't really know, and we have valuations of DeepSeek. We don't really know where the best innovators come from or what sticks. We know OpenAI is now looking at possibly doing hardware. Anyway, how do you see it? I mean, do you need to have a blueprint of where you think we're in 5 years to be a good investor?
Well, look, just to give some perspective, 5 years in terms of AI, we were just talking backstage, ChatGPT just came out about 2.5 years ago. But to all of us, at least I think to many of us who use it, feels like it's been out forever. It's become an incredibly useful tool on a personal level, but as Samia said, and as Chris has referred to, what's happening already is a lot of functional work that frankly is quite consistent and mechanical, AI is being able to sort of bring efficiency to that. Now the utopia is obviously this next level of how does all of this recursive sort of development and learning that AI is able to do, it starts to create what I'll call, well, we're calling it generative AI, but really becoming creative, right? And not just being an efficiency tool. I think that's the utopia that we're all working towards, and then as we get there, I think the sort of horizons open up even larger.
I want to actually ask Chris about valuations and whether some of the AI is overhyped, but before we get to that, I'm going to put the audience to work. There's a poll for you. You can also ask questions if you want to our great panelists, but the poll is basically, have you used an AI model in the past 6 months at work? So it can either be personally, whether you used it, or whether within your team or the company have used it. So 1, no, I'm 100% human. 2, yes, and I was open about it. 3, yes, but I also used it secretly. So we'll get that, to settle down in a second. And Chris, I mean, I guess this goes, to the question of what do you say to the naysayers who say the technology, A, is overhyped, but also there's just unrealistic valuations out there for startups?
I would say on an absolute basis, as an industry, the potential is unbounded. It's an unbelievably big opportunity. At the micro level of individual companies, there are many, if not the vast majority, are way overhyped. So I think we underestimate the potential impact of AI in the medium to long term because it's hard to wrap our brains around how pervasive and fast it will impact us. But the hope of some of these companies achieving that, it'll be very difficult, and it will take longer in a lot of these areas than people hope. So, it's both at the same time.
But does it change everything, or are there specific sectors that will be disrupted, 10 times more?
I think the areas that I'm most excited about are in the office of the CFO, back office, administrative compliance, distribution, all sorts of layers where there's just a lot of painful bureaucracy and process and paperwork. And reducing that to free people up to do higher order activities would be my utopia in this. And remove the drudgery of your job and allow you to do the reasons that you took the job in the first place. I think it'll take a number of years to get there, and the challenge will actually be less technological, I think, than restructuring companies and workflows and jobs and that transformation that has to happen in organizations to unlock it.
Samia, do you see anything being overhyped? Again, it's interesting how you use it because it is for the tasks that doesn't make you dream when you start a new job.
Yeah, I agree with Chris. Actually, I'm training the team to start asking themselves before we recruit anybody, is that a task that can be done by AI, or do you really need a human to do it? For the time being, this applies to very junior tasks. On the hyper-evaluation, and it doesn't bother me, I'm not investing in AI companies. I'm investing in solutions, tools, and applications which will enable my team to produce better results, enable our machines to produce better results, and really create more value to our shareholders, which is what I'm here to do. If you look at how Multiply's portfolio is constructed, and if you look at several macroeconomic factors happening, we're in an inflationary macro environment, we have a lot of supply chain disruptions, and that costs money on the way we do business. And in my mind, the only way to really get over this cost and still deliver profitability and double-digit growth to our shareholders is by embracing AI and augmenting the way we do work. And we've been doing that at multiple levels, as I said.
How do you, so back to the poll, how do you use AI models personally?
Oh yeah, I started using it before Davos this year. My team, it was a model that our tech team developed in-house. And of course, at Davos, you meet a lot of people. And this agent, we named it Cora, and it was on WhatsApp. And let's say you introduced me to a Mr. Joe from an X company. In a second, I would WhatsApp Cora, ask her, give me the bio, and I'll have a glimpse, short summary of the person I'm meeting in order to know how to direct the conversation. So this was my first personal one. Today, as a board, as I told you, we have the board observer, but also I have my own virtual board. We've contracted a company called Aleria, a very successful AI company in Abu Dhabi, and they've developed a virtual board for me that helps me make better decisions, that challenges my decisions. I put Elon Musk on the board, I put Michael Saylor, I put Warren Buffett, and other industry leaders that were relevant to us, and I upload my presentations and get, you know, challenged on my decisions. So these are my personal, but of course across the company we use it at multiple bigger scale.
I love that. So the poll's coming in, yes, and I was open about it. 84% of you actually use it like that. How do you two use it, Chris?
I was curious if Elon's AI was making her Doge, her company, and cut her costs. So we use it as a co-pilot as investment decisions. So we use it to help us find companies earlier and more quickly than we could as humans. We use it to understand context around when we're making decisions, similarly to how she's using it as a board member. And then we actually use it for supporting the portfolio as well. So it's a lot of leverage in doing the same things that we would have historically done as a firm, but with a digital co-pilot helping to execute that more efficiently.
Henry?
Yeah, no, I use it on a personal level now for years. It reminded me of, actually, if I go all the way back to sort of Google's arrival on the scene. If we remember back then, you went to Yahoo, there were others like Lycos and Alta Vista, these kind of busy pages. And for Google, so striking, just the search bar. But I just remember using Google the first time, it's like, wow, I'm getting all the relevant results I wanted. If I fast forward to ChatGPT, you know, over the years, I'd become what I'll consider a very power Google user, using the right keywords, prompts, and things like that to find as efficiently what I wanted as quickly as I could. Then, of course, going into GPT, it was like, wait a second, this is now me to an order of 100 being able to find things on Google and summarizing it for me so quickly. So that was just an amazing revelation. But actually, the amazing thing about ChatGPT is that, and all the other AIs, is that the more you use it, the more it starts to understand what your interests are. It learns. And also, you also start to learn its limitations, right? The things that we always talk about is data, but all these LLMs are based upon their data sets, and knowing even like when the cutoff dates for these data sets are. Because if you're a scientist or researcher doing cutting edge stuff and you're trying to use ChatGPT on an earlier language model, right? Like, you're not going to find what you need, but at the same time, it does very good on like current news. You can just type in and say, hey, what did Elon Musk say yesterday? And they'll do the Google search, and it'll give you a quick summary of exactly what happened.
Or you watch Bloomberg. Chris, when you look at, you know, you have $1 billion. Like, where do you want to be invested in that $1 billion? Because you crowdfunded $1 billion to be in AI. Where do you want to be invested? Again, is it, you know, is it regional? Is it sectors? Like, if I gave you $500 million right now, where would you put that money to work?
So I grew up very internationally, and I think the scale of the opportunity is for sure global. But over time, we've actually become more focused in Silicon Valley and New York. And so about 80% of the capital we deploy is local, because You have a lot of the people who are able to basically live in the future are coming out of the consumer hyperscaled companies. And so that's one area, or the density of industry in New York. And so we found that a lot of this is doing a time motion study of what the humans would do in these respective roles. And so those are two geographies that have a lot of advantage, and we get paid for the risk that we take very early because there's lots of capital upstream.
But is it a kind of, if you look at the value chain, it could be chips, and then you go up into like hardware. Is it too soon to know where you want to be in that?
I mean, there's a tremendous opportunity at the chips and infrastructure, the data center layer, for sure. I'm more concerned about the LLM and the tooling side of it. I think that there's a once-in-a-humanity type of opportunity to aggregate all sorts of siloed data in every industry and redefine the workflows of those industries. And so we're very focused on vertical AI in those industries.
Samia?
You know, I think if we look at the global economy, we have a GDP of 110 trillion, for example, the number. A lot of studies estimate that there will be a good 15% uplift because of AI on that GDP. If you look at the UAE, they say they will have another 15% uplift to the country's GDP. So I'm investing in anything, all technologies that would uplift our performance by similar, if not better numbers, because as a public company, we have to be outperforming the markets and the economy. There are opportunities both on the supply and on the demand side. On the supply, as you said, it goes from chips to manufacturing to data center to the energy required to fuel those data centers, to the minerals, to the copper and silicon required to produce those, you know. I'm not looking there, but on the demand, I think McKinsey said that only 1%, they've done a study, and 1% of corporates believe that they've used AI maturely in their organizations. That tells you there's a 99% opportunity from a demand side for people to invest in AI and unlock value, and that's where we're looking.
Henry, do you think we spend enough time? I know this is, you know, as a tech investor, and if we look at your outlook, do we spend enough time figuring out who won't exist in 5-6 years? Like, because nobody wants, you know, that Kodak moment. You don't want to be investing in a company that gets wiped out by AI.
Yeah. Now, that's always hard because, you know, the amazing thing about technology, and if we've looked over it over the internet era, is that it's followed kind of like the power law. It doesn't seem obvious that there should just be a central place like Amazon where most people buy most goods across categories, right? If you remember the internet boom of the 90s, Pets.com, I mean, they were selling sale equipment. There were all these verticals. But, you know, what Amazon cracked is that they knew that in the end, people wanted assortment, people wanted low prices, and the people wanted to be able to receive their goods fast, right? So they used technology to then solve that problem, even on the logistics side, a real-world side. So if you went back 30 years and said, oh, what should you invest in today? I'd be like, okay, anything e-commerce. But no one would have predicted that one player would come out the winner, right? And I think AI, that power law distribution is going to be somewhat similar in that there will be a small number of winners. And I think this is why there's a massive race in terms of raising capital. Yeah. The valuations look silly, but if you think about what the prize is when you win, yeah, these entry valuations don't seem silly, right? So in some ways, as an investor, you know, if I look at from my micro scale, I'm looking at it in an emerging market or in a region like Vietnam or Southeast Asia. What will all these massive changes in AI do be adapted by local businesses, parties, or sectors that will let them be winners in their market or in the global market?
I have a different perspective. I think on the infrastructure layer, and particularly the hyperscalers, there will be a consolidation because it takes so much capital to do it. I think there's going to be thousands of winners in almost every industry vertical. The sales force isn't at risk against an AI sales force. They're at risk as an AI sales rep in pharmaceuticals that does a really good job of that one function, and there'll be many, many thousands of versions of that.
I think on the demand side, as I said, everybody is a winner if they get into AI decisively and promptly and do it well to create value. On the supply chain, the winners have to be those with deep pockets, a lot of capex, a lot of patience, and a lot of innovation. And I'm not betting on that race because, you know, there were so many Googles and now there's one Google, right? So I'd rather focus on unlocking value using AI as tools.
Well, thank you all for a wonderful conversation. Thank you for joining us. Thank you.
Please welcome to the stage James Flynn, Managing Partner at Deerfield, for a conversation with Bloomberg's Jennifer Zabazaja.
Wonderful. Jim, how are you doing?
Great. This is a really great, terrific event.
It's great to have you here, and the last session was talking about AI, which we'll get into in just a bit, but I thought it would be interesting for the audience to hear your perspective as someone who has worked in the biotech field 30 plus years, correct? Yep. How would you assess the sentiment right now for biotechnology, biosciences? What's your take?
So it really depends on whether you're a scientist or an investor, because the answer is almost opposite right now. So on the science, innovation is exponential, and we're really hitting that upward inflection point. And the thing to understand is every single disease is a finite puzzle of biologic pieces. And genetics has given us a lot of those pieces, and diseases that are very close to genetics, you have almost all of the pieces. So what's happening is universities all over the world are flipping over pieces, putting them in place. And I don't know if people here do puzzles, but as they get finished, it gets easier and easier and easier to put in the last pieces. And that's where we're at in science right now. So it is a certainty that we are going to cure important diseases over the next 10 to 15 years. Certain cancers, there's one genetic mutation. They're going to be very easy. Schizophrenia, over 100 associated genes, and it's in the head. It's harder to get to. So some diseases are going to take longer. They're bigger puzzles, some shorter. Sentiment from investors is terrible. I've been in this business 36 years. I've seen 3 bubbles. What happens in every case is in a 1 to 2 year period, everything doubles, triples. Next 1 to 2 year period, everything collapses back to the same point. So over the last few years, we've gone through a bubble. We've collapsed, so things have reconsolidated. Things are cheap again. But there's also some regulatory uncertainty, at least in the U.S., on top of that, that's keeping people a little bit nervous on the investment side.
So how critical, then, is this time period from where you sit with Deerfield? What is it that you think would make the change to prevent this from being another bubble that we've seen in the past?
Well, you know, bubbles are a composite of speculation, interest rates, and a lot of things that make people make bad bets. And what happens in the bubble, the IPO market opens up. People accept companies that are too early, too risky, require too much cash.
We can see there on the screen, yeah.
Yeah, and so, you know, you have a lot of unsustainable company types in the public markets, and they, frankly, just have to go away. So you have to just wait for that. That's something that just takes time. Management expectations become unrealistic as well in terms of what their product should be valued at, and that also has to reset. So a lot of this is just time. Yeah.
You talked about a few different diseases that are the compilation of a number of factors. When you think about where Deerfield is investing, where do you see maybe the most progress? What diseases are we getting closer to finding cures for?
Well, it's definitely those that are link most closely to genetics. So, you know, a lot of cancers, there's actually lots and lots and lots of different cancers. In each tissue, they're different mutations. And so there's a lot of puzzles to solve in order to, quote unquote, cure cancer. But you're going to see a lot of progress in diseases like that, as I said. The other thing that data and software is transforming right now is the delivery of care. So right now, most of care is, for example, post-heart attack. So in the U.S., there's over 3 million preventable cardiac procedures per year. Preventable, right? So medicine itself has to change from being oriented around hospitals and treating people that have had a heart attack to things in the home, medicines and things that can prevent that from occurring in the first place. So there's a huge investment in data, clinical record data, genetic data, and integrating those to understand the best care pathways and really how to do that at home.
So that is AI, more investment into AI and data.
Yeah, AI has transformed how we can combine different data sets. So if you go to a hospital, they keep a clinical record on you. Large hospitals have millions of clinical records, and those clinical records say, hey, if you have people that have these conditions and backgrounds and you do this, it's better. But it's a really complex assemblage of data, and what software is allowing you to do is integrate it in a very useful way and then ask, where's the best place to deliver this care? If software can be predictive, oftentimes you don't have to go to the hospital or have a direct physician intervention.
Which is interesting to talk to you about because Deerfield invests across the healthcare value chain, including in hospitals. What does that mean for infrastructure and hospitals and the like? Will there still be a need for that, or will we be preventing more diseases, therefore less patients in the hospital, therefore a less need for them?
I mean, it's a real challenge. I mean, our hospital medical system has been the root of a lot of discovery in medical innovation. Yet at the same time, it's super expensive and it's super dependent on treating diseases that have occurred already.
Yep.
And so the system's going to have to change, and it's really an innovator's game. It's going to be the new drugs, it's going to be the new technologies that allow prevention in the home, and that's why it's really exciting from a venture capital standpoint, because it's probable that the entire system is going to reinvent itself.
What does that mean, though? What does that look like?
Well, take a disease like diabetes. So we all know that there's a weight management component, but there's also an eye component. There's also a heart component. There's also a skin component. And just imagine somebody that has to go see 4 different specialists on 4 different days. They're not going to do it. And it's one reason why chronic illness is not always managed well. It's just too hard for somebody to actually do all that work. So instead, imagine something at home that beeps horribly until you go do something for 5 minutes, where you can have a telemedicine visit. Somebody's going to do that. And so, you know, that suddenly removes visits from a whole bunch of different physician types and brings it home, but at the same time it makes it accessible, it makes it affordable, and it makes it possible.
So this could ultimately result in healthier, longer lives? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
I hope you're saying that.
Yeah. I firmly believe that. And, you know, a lot of people talk about longevity. We tend to talk about health span. So it's harder to move the number of years that someone's alive. It's easier to affect the quality of their life while they are alive. So what you want is each year that you're alive, you want to be able to be engaged, active, do all the things you want to do. And that's definitely going to improve.
Is that in the near term, or do you think it's a bit far off that will actually
right.
some sort of improvements?
It's here and now.
It's here and now.
Yeah, I think it's here and now. Now, some things are constrained by regulation. Some things are constrained by how people price things today.
Yeah.
Lots of infrastructure is built around reimbursement systems that exist today. So those are going to be sticky. Those are going to be hard to change. But, you know, there's a cost equation around healthcare where people will consume as much as they can get, right? And companies will charge as much as they can.
Yeah.
And so, you know, on one hand, healthcare expenditures could be just enormous. What changes that is prevention and moving things to the home. And so there's, you know, it's inevitable that, you know, that's eventually going to occur.
You talk about policies, which is a very important component of healthcare. And we're seeing policies different for healthcare, depending on where you look in the world. Is there a model that would be most enabling to get us to some of those progress points that you're talking about there?
Well, look, you have to embrace innovation, and you have to understand that it requires change in reimbursement, regulation. So you have to have a model that has the ability to be flexible, and I think, you know, I think most countries actually have that capability if they truly believe that the health is there and that the cost effectiveness of that health is there. And I think that that proof point is probably still, you know, 5 to 10 years off for most countries.
Why is that?
Because, you know, like if you're in the middle of it, you can see it, but people haven't experienced it in reality enough to actually believe it. So I think we're just going to have much more real-life proof before whole societies embrace all of the change that's necessary.
Are you concerned, though, about some of the pullback in terms of funding from public governments or public policy? Does that risk maybe setting us back in some of the progress that you're noting here?
Yeah, so, you know, NIH funding in the U.S. is one of the most important components of biomedical innovation. It's where a lot of those puzzle pieces get flipped over that the rest of us kind of collect and turn into things that are useful. And right now the proposal is to reduce the overhead that's paid, that pays for a lot of the stuff there that you know, is used for innovation. And it's been a hugely successful investment over time, but you know, you can't measure it in years. You have to measure it in decades, and when you do, the return has been enormous. I think that's going to settle out somewhere that works. You know, it's a system that's kind of people haven't looked at very closely, and maybe overhead payments to some institutions are too high. So I think it's a fair question.
The debate, you mean?
Yeah, I think the debate's well, how much to pay is a fair debate, but you know, where it lands needs to end up being somewhere reasonable.
But are you optimistic, though, about that happening?
About it. It's too important. Biomedical innovation is too important, and at the end of the day, there is always a strong lobby with many different stakeholders in it that can see that. And so, look, budget in every administration in the U.S. has said, let's go look at healthcare for some pennies, right? And each time it's a terribly difficult conversation because you need innovation, you want to cure disease, you want to make it more affordable, but you don't always want to pay for it now.
Yeah.
So, you know, that tug of war is going to exist forever simply because of healthcare demand.
That means, depending on which jurisdiction you look at, healthcare being treated for a disease is going to potentially even grow exponentially, depending on where you look. Isn't that ultimately not great for the industry and biotechnology as a whole?
Look, I think people want to be disease-free. Yeah. They want to have a long health span. I think the innovations need to be accessible and affordable. If you look at, for example, drug costs, they're growing, but prevention shrinks the other piece, and the other piece is 80% of the cost. So drugs are 20%, all of the infrastructure and everything else is 80%. So even if this grows really rapidly, as long as this shrinks commensurately, the equation is going to work. So that, you know, that's the proof point that makes everything come together. And, you know, I think everybody would prefer to take a pill than get treated for a heart attack.
Absolutely. Jim, can you talk about your predictions 5-10 years out, considering, again, some of the investments and the innovations that we're seeing today? Where are we headed towards?
I believe that software will end up diagnosing most people well within that period. So, you know, right now software can already diagnose better than most physicians can, I mean, if you think about a primary care physician trying to diagnose any disease, including rare diseases, the chance that they're going to go down all the diagnostic pathways in the right way is very low. But if you're a large language model, you have all of that embedded in you. And so the first point of diagnosis, I think, will be much more large language model driven. Right now, we're very used to second, third, fourth opinions on complicated matters, but that's just because of human fallibility and bias in the process, which the large language models won't have. So I think that's going to be very important. And as a patient, I think they're going to be accessible. So if you want to know if something's happening to you or someone you care about, I think there's going to be interfaces where you can get that same download without necessarily going to a physician. And, you know, there's a few hurdles that we'll have to get through in order to get there. And I think cancer in 15 years is going to be mostly a thing of the past.
A thing of the past?
Yeah, mostly.
So what will be the need?
I mean, for the health span. I mean, people, if you increase longevity, I take it all back. But within our health span, yeah.
Is there still a need, though, for doctors, for nurses, for researchers? I mean, where do these jobs then go?
Well, that's a problem for way in the future, I think.
Okay.
You know, right now we need all of that infrastructure. In fact, we need more of it. In the U.S., we have a physician shortage, a nurse shortage. The jobs aren't always enjoyable. So it's there's a lot of stress. And of course, physicians and nurses see it's a time of change. Actually, 40% of what a nurse does can be replaced by a large language model. And most of that is documentation and searching for stuff. And so you can actually meaningfully improve a nurse's job and make a hospital more economic by employing a large language model on behalf of the nurse.
Will pandemics then be a thing of the past as well?
I don't think so, because we keep tinkering with stuff, and you look at pandemics. It's our novel interfaces with nature. It's how bugs change over time, and we won't be able to anticipate all of that. We might have a lot faster response. And what you might have seen in COVID that was really cool is we have antibodies, we have mRNA, we have small molecules, we have gene therapy, we have gene editing. So, when a new bug appears, we have a lot of validated tools that can go after it. And if we do that in a cohesive way, then, I think they'll shrink in duration, but I think they're going to stick with us.
The pandemics.
Yeah.
Let's hope not anytime soon. Jim, before we wrap up, let's talk about Deerfield and some of the portfolio of investments. Can you share what excites you about what's in your portfolio and maybe what you're looking to next?
Sure. So, we have our own laboratories, and we are developing our own drugs. So we're developing 25 drugs ourselves at Deerfield. We just dosed a first 2-year-old who has autism with a SHANK3 gene, which they're missing and causes autism, and it was safe. And we're really excited about being able to pick away at diseases that are super important and growing in importance. But this whole software thing is a real thing, and changes how medicine is delivered. So we're very involved with insurers in trying to interpret how to provide the best care at the cheapest cost, and providing tools for that. Like GLP-1s, really cool, lose weight, but they actually affect all kinds of other chronic diseases. So what does that mean for you? That's a super complicated question that software is helping us answer on a person-by-person basis. So the drug side, the data delivery side, both very engaged, very excited about.
So we still don't know some of those answers then that you're pointing out there.
Yeah. We still have, another 15 years of discovery at least. Yeah.
And so then, what happens next? I mean, what will be key to sort of keeping up this momentum in the growth trajectory for bioscience?
Investment in information. If we didn't have genetic information, if we don't have the biological pieces that create the puzzles, we have most of the platform technologies that allow us to get at them, but there needs to be continued research into the puzzles that are still mysterious, especially those really, like schizophrenia, the very big, complicated puzzles that affect Alzheimer's, another very complicated, very large puzzle. Most of the ones that are stuck behind our skull are big and complicated and are going to take a lot more work.
You mentioned insurance companies. I mean, are they incentivized to want to get on board with this? Because they could ultimately be losing money in the long run, right? I mean, what is in it for them, and what are they telling you in your discussions with them?
Yeah. So look, insurance companies pay a fee. That's a guess. They charge people a certain amount of money for insurance, and it's a guess on what the cost of care is. So once they've created that rate, they care a lot about how much it actually costs them to give that care. So kind of short term, they push back on things that are expensive, but longer term, they recognize that anything that changes, that bends the push of chronic disease is going to lower cost. And so they want to put things in place that systematically lower cost. So they charge this, but it turns out to be this. And then they charge this, which is lower, but it turns out to be this, because they're bending chronic disease. And so all of the tools that we're talking about, all of the drugs that we're talking about bend that curve. And so there's, insurance companies, I think, in general, are part of the positive change.
Hopefully we'll continue to bend that curve. Jim,
Yes.
Flynn, thank you so much.
Thank
Very
you.
fascinating conversation. Thanks everyone.
Thank you.
AI has turbocharged data center demand.
Nuclear is a wonderful way forward as one of the sources of energy, one of the sources of sustainable energy.
The technology, I think, has gone much further than people thought it was going to.
Very big into the data centers, and that's going to be a very hot item in the coming years.
Please welcome to the stage Rob Barnett, Senior Energy Analyst at Bloomberg Intelligence.
Good morning, everyone. That video was a great segue. Today, I want to talk to you about our belief that AI is one of the most important new paradigms in the energy world, perhaps comparable to the LNG revolution or the breakthrough that we saw with U.S. shale oil and gas, or the stunning rise of renewables that we've seen in recent years. Earlier this month, Sam Altman was speaking before the U.S. Congress, and he said two things that I think are particularly relevant for the conversation today. One is he said that the cost of AI will ultimately converge to the cost of energy. And he also said the abundance of AI will be limited by the abundance of energy. Now, when I first heard Sam Altman speaking about the energy aspects of AI, I have to admit I was a bit skeptical. Sam and other AI luminaries were talking about this idea that energy was going to be such a constraint on AI. The CEO of ARM, microprocessor company, talked about the idea that U.S. power demand, about 20 to 25% of it, could be consumed by data centers by 2030. So I set out on a mission to disprove that because I didn't think it felt right. I've worked in the energy business a couple of decades. But after doing some substantive work on the space, I think that the neighborhood is roughly correct. So first slide up here on the screen that I've got may help to illustrate this a little bit. So my colleague Mandeep Singh from our technology team at Bloomberg Intelligence, his group has sized the generative AI market. And the takeaway from the chart that you'll see on the left is that by 2030, this is potentially going to be $1 trillion a year market. And so we're seeing hyperscalers, Alphabet, Microsoft, Meta, on down the line, really increasing CapEx. And over the last couple of years, CapEx has more than doubled for most of the players. They're building data centers, and those data centers consume quite a lot of power. So if you take the ideas from this group and translate it into power demand, here's what the figures look like. So if you use 2023 as a baseline, we think, at least in the U.S., data centers could, power demand could surge anywhere from 4x to 10x by 2030. These are profound numbers. Typically, you don't see things moving this quickly in the utility world. This is a slow-moving segment. And perhaps to that point, my colleagues at Bloomberg NEF, they just put out a great new report on this topic as well. Everybody wants to talk about AI these days, and they're closer to the lower end of our projection. Now, why is that? It's because if you do a bottom-up projection and you look in the U.S., the utilities simply can't get electrons on the grid as fast as these AI companies want to move. And so that leaves us perhaps with the two options. One is that the AI revolution goes global, and I think we're seeing evidence that that's happening. The other is that, maybe the industry will find a way. If you go read about XAI and what they've done with their facility in Memphis, I mean, they're building very quickly there, and they're being very creative about how they achieve that outcome. For those who don't think too much about power, I'll just quickly note that beyond AI, there are lots of other things that are shaping the narrative in that space. In the U.S. right now, and globally, we are seeing a surge in manufacturing spending. This was partly propelled by the IRA, trade policy, all sorts of things are contributing to this, but we are electrifying what we can electrify. So manufacturing, very electricity intensive, vehicles increasingly moving in this direction as well. And so we are increasingly living in a world where we need more electrons. Now, what kind of electrons are getting built? This chart that you see up on the screen is the amalgamation of all of the power plants that want to connect to the grid in the U.S. Now, the takeaway here is that solar and storage are by far the two biggest types of power that folks are trying to build in the U.S. It's pretty analogous globally, too, by the way. We have about 1 terawatt of solar projects out there in the ether. For reference, the U.S.'s total installed power capacity is about 1.25 terawatts. So a lot of solar's out there, a lot of storage, a lot of wind. Of course, there's gas in the mix as well. But when you think about gas, there's a time constraint on the matter. If you want a new gas turbine, well, you have to get in line. If you think about a company like GE Vernova, they're currently taking orders for 2029, 2030. And so there's definitely a gas piece to the story, but because of the pace with which you can move with solar storage these days, we think they are the types of technologies to potentially benefit from this big build-out in AI data centers. Quickly, I have a chart up on the screen just showing the solar names. They had a really rough 2024, also a challenging 2023, despite a lot of optimism from the U.S. president and the prior administration. We think they are back to growth in 2025 and future years as well, even with all the discussion about tax policy that's going on in the U.S. So look for solar names and storage names to be geared to the idea that data centers are rapidly propelling power demand. We think that the hyperscalers, despite their ambitions to be carbon neutral and all of their ESG goals, are a very practical lot. They are focused on rapidly scaling AI, and we don't see how you get there without a significant surge in gas use as well. This is a U.S.-focused chart, but by 2030, we think U.S. gas demand could increase somewhere by 3 to 10 BCF per day by 2030. And this is not the only pillar of the U.S. gas story. LNG demand also growing quickly, as you know, here in this country. And we think that, you know, the sort of playbook is that you see a combination of gas, solar, and storage. Maybe a quick comment on nuclear, because as we saw with the video just leading up to me, CEO of NVIDIA talked about nuclear. Nuclear, great technology. It's certainly carbon-free. And what I'm showing on the chart here is nuclear output from the U.S., very stable over the last 25 years. And we see this stunning rise of wind plus solar. At the end of the day, nuclear power plants they've all been, you know, behind schedule, over budget. Maybe there's some new technologies, SMRs, that will change that narrative, but good luck getting them built before 2030. I think you have to have a long vision for nuclear. Maybe can play a very significant role in this question as you look out to 2035 and beyond. And then quickly, this is a chart showing data centers in Saudi Arabia. I think we're going to see build out in regions like this. We saw while President Trump was over last week the Nguyen announcement. Nguyen is a 500 megawatt data center. For reference, Saudi Arabia currently has about 165 megawatts installed. So this is a great leap from their current AI data center capacity with continued momentum to build much more. Now, if you want to go deeper on this topic, I'm going to quickly throw up a QR code. Feel free to scan that. You can go read our thoughts on the matter, connect with me on LinkedIn, say hello, and maybe just a parting thought. OpenAI has recently said that when we say please and thank you to the LLMs, it costs the company tens of millions of dollars. That's because of all the compute and energy necessary. So if you want to help alleviate some of the near-term energy constraints, perhaps don't be as polite with the AI. Thank you.
Please welcome to the stage Doug Adams, President and CEO of NTT Global Data Centers, Navid Chamdia, Head of Real Estate at the Qatar Investment Authority, Marc C. Ganzi, CEO of DigitalBridge, and Goodwin, Chairman, Managing Principal, Member of the Investment Committee, and Co-Founder of GAW Capital, for a conversation with Bloomberg's Jemana Bersachi.
Well, that was such a great setup by my colleague in Bloomberg Intelligence. We don't need to speak anymore. No, it was fantastic. I actually do want to say, before we kick off our panel, the segue was perfect from the prior speaker, because he was just saying that if we're polite to these LLM models, it consumes more energy and becomes a lot more expensive. So we've got a poll that should be coming up in a second. Do you say thank you to your AI model? Yes? No? I haven't used an AI model yet. So scan the code. And while you do that, I'm going to get started with the panel. It's really good to be talking to you. Navid, I'm going to start with you. maybe just set the stage for us, because of course there's so much hype around artificial intelligence, and the two things sort of go hand in hand. You need the data centers to train a lot of these models. How do you see AI impacting data center infrastructure in the coming years?
Yeah, no, good question. But I think if you take a step back, you have to look at the whole demand for cloud storage to start with, and then how AI is having an impact on further increasing it. Just while we were waiting backstage, I was just looking at the history of clouds. In 2004, the word cloud storage did not exist. Smartphone maximum memory was 5 gigabytes, now it's 100 gigabytes. And just the amount of data storage created by the smartphones that we all have now is 246 billion gigabytes. Add to that Netflix, Amazon, Spotify, Teams, WhatsApp, Zoom, and you are, and the fintech demand, and you are at 3 trillion gigabytes. Add to that artificial intelligence now, the language learning models that you mentioned, and that's supposed to be 50% of cloud storage demand in the next few years. So from our perspective, AI is, yes, enhancing the demand side, but as QIA, we've been investing in data centers for the last 10 years. What we are focused is not so much on the demand side, we are focused more on the capacity side, the supply side, that do we have the capability and do we have the right partners to deliver these data centers that are required, both for hyperscale cloud storage and also for AI. And there are various challenges around that.
I'm going to come back to that point. Doug, I'd like to move on to you. You recently announced an expansion of your global data centers division, land across pretty much everywhere, from what I can tell, North America, Europe, Asia. So it sounds like you see very strong demand as well, but not specific to any region, everywhere.
Yeah, so we look at everything from a global perspective, and we believe that there's going to be growth all across the globe. Right now, we're seeing strong demand signals for the last couple of years in the US. Europe's been constrained because of power availability. Some of the same issues exist within Asia. And so we have a team of people that have literally scoured the earth to find 10 plus properties, a little over 2 gigawatts of building load capable in those properties to build out. Because what we're seeing as a company is our pipeline has swelled over 25% year over year. We are seeing tremendous offtake from both enterprise and cloud, as well as AI. And if you look at the stats on AI and the projected growth rates, Jensen Huang talks about his belief that AI, will contribute to over it'll be necessary to contribute over $1 trillion worth of data centers over the next 4 years just to meet the AI demand. And to put that in perspective, it's taken 15 years in the cloud environment to hit that $1 trillion data center number. So it's about 4x what you're looking at for AI. So we're extremely bullish on the global platform, and we're seeing different areas of the globe that we're investing in for different reasons. In the US, India, it's mostly hyperscale, and that's where we're seeing most of our absorption, most of our offtake. Within Europe, there's a fair amount of retail and enterprise, and within Asia, we're seeing a tremendous amount of enterprise, and we're starting to see some very large takedowns for AI and cloud. And so the properties we've purchased over the last year have been Milan, Frankfurt, Hillsboro, Oregon, several in Tokyo. We've purchased all across, so we're starting production on those. And frankly, on about half of those properties, before we even put a shovel in the ground, we've already leased the properties out either partially or completely. So we're extremely bullish on the outlook of the industry. If you just go back a year ago, 2 years ago, the CAGR was 13.5%. The projected CAGR now is 23%. So, there's not a lot of industries growing at that rate, and we're very bullish.
Yeah. The numbers are huge, though. $1 trillion is a chart up there, $230 billion, some of the big spenders last year, those 5 that are listed. Marc, let me ask you, there is a lot of money going into this space. there's skeptics out there. They're nervous about there potentially being a capital glut and for all of this to come crashing down. Are we setting up for another bubble? Is this going to be another dot-com bubble in space?
Yeah, look, to contextualize it, I think that we're in a very different environment from a demand perspective. I think you saw a lot of speculation in the dot-com era where people laid fiber cabling with no customers on the other end of those cables. I think what's interesting, having been in the sector for 30 years and having watched some of these cycles, what is different about this cycle is we don't have a demand problem. We have plenty of customers that require compute. We certainly don't have a lack of land, and we certainly don't have a lack of capital. What we do have is a lack of power. We can certainly drill down into that. But on the capital side, it's actually interesting. I think most of the allocators globally, and Navid, you could vouch for this, I think investors have put a lot of capital to work in data centers, particularly in infrastructure funds. And a lot of these platforms that they've developed have reached a level of 10, 15, $20 billion. And ultimately, LPs are saying the same thing, which is, okay, this has been great. We've enjoyed riding this AI wave, but at some point we need capital back. How do we create DPI? And how do you recycle capital? Investors obviously want to invest in great ideas in AI. They want to be exposed to investment-grade leases. But at the end of the day, we do have an obligation as a GP to return capital and to create returns. So one of the things that I hear most recently in the last sort of 6 months of fundraising is, what are you doing for us in terms of returning capital? By the way, it was the same thing that happened in cell towers in the late 90s. It happened in fiber in the early 2000s. It happened, Doug, with cloud computing in the last 10 to 15 years. People want that capital back. And I think ultimately it's about where you sit in the capital structure. And if you think about the progression of how digital infrastructure has been built, it started almost as venture capital. It migrated to private equity. And then ultimately it now sits with infrastructure funds. And now there's the next leg that's going to play out, which is 90 to 120 billion of stabilized data centers that ultimately has to be in real estate vehicles, whether it's a publicly traded S-REIT or if it's a continuation fund or if it's really insurance capital that's coming into the sector for the first time. There is going to be a recycling of capital that is going to happen. And we're at that moment right now.
Would you say there is a funding gap, though, given the needs and given your projections?
I don't think there's a funding gap. I mean, we put out about 26 billion of CapEx last year just at DigitalBridge alone. We have another 19 billion that's funded this year. And I think the way that we're funding those assets today are perhaps a little bit different from how we funded it 3 years ago. I think certainly the financing market has matured. We're talking about equity. We haven't even begun to talk about debt. I think the way these assets are now being deployed in the securitization market and the depth of that securitization market, particularly through investment grade, is about as deep as you've ever seen it. Just in the last 30 days alone, we had 6 data center securitizations that got launched and closed across many different platforms, across many different GPs. If you aggregate all of that securitized capital, which is predominantly insurance companies or opportunistic debt investors, there was close to almost $12 billion of securitized paper that's traded hands in digital infrastructure in the last 30 days. So there's a coming of age of this asset class that I think is really interesting. I've gotten to watch it because I started in the early 90s when I was backed by family offices and venture capital. And now today we're an infrastructure fund. But I think this progression of capital is really important. And I think the movement of capital and the maturation of the debt markets for digital infrastructure is something that's really important. So we don't have a funding gap as long as capital keeps moving. Capital has to keep moving in this market.
Yeah. Goodwin, one of the big events earlier this year was DeepSeek. And for those in the space, it wasn't a massive surprise. But for the rest of us who are sort of tourists in the worlds of LLM, it did come as a surprise that China were becoming competitive in foundational LLMs. How does that change the picture for China and for the broader Asia-Pacific region to have China really powering ahead with their own foundational models?
Right. I think historically we've always seen China is actually very good at taking what's new technology and then adopting it, adapting it to create a actually better user experience quite often. In this particular case, I think there's a lot of excitement, in particular whether it's the West, APAC, or China, about inference. Right? So when you go back to the supply-demand question, you also have to ask yourself, because data center, you have the old architecture are done, first is co-location, secondly is cloud, and then thirdly, the new big use for AI is training, which actually the Blackwell chips are what, 132 kilowatts, right, demand, going to 600 kilowatts of Rudin, but cloud architecture is only 10 kilowatts, right, less than 10 kilowatts. So you look at that, and then you have to ask yourself, where's the supply-demand imbalance? Is it too much supply potentially on the hyperscale training side? Right, in China, the word is east side is for data, west side is for compute. Because east side is where it's cooler, much cheaper power. Right? For example, China doesn't have a power constraint issue. 2% of the power today is consumed by data center, going to 4% by 2030, going to 2030. By 2035, it's expected to be 10% of the total power. And it has a much more modern power grid. When you take all that into the equation, then you realize in China, you're seeing a little bit of how the world actually could play out. Because China is one big country. You have the training being done on the east. You have compute being done on the west, where it's closer to population. So latency matters. Inference is actually where it's driving the demand right now. So the supply-demand imbalance could very well go back to which part is the supply-demand imbalance. Very well, we could actually be completely undersupply on the cloud architecture side, right, where it drives application, it drives inference.
Well, where do you see growth, where do you see the fastest growth in the Asia-Pacific region right now?
Certainly, China is playing catch-up. Where China this year, they're talking about $50 billion plus of capex spending. So China actually went through a very high capex spending during COVID because of stay-at-home, e-commerce adoption, and so on and so forth, and then went through a lull because of the chip war with U.S., so lack of ability to get chips, and also the big players couldn't quite figure out, is it going to be a winner-takes-all on LLM? So not all the biggest companies were focused on creating or chasing LLM because the business model is less clear on the LLM. Right? So you have a bit of a lull, and DeepSeek actually seemed to have all of a sudden create urgency for everyone to play catch-up. So the $50 billion in capex in 2025 is a 59% year-on-year increase from last year. And then three major players, Alibaba, Tencent, and ByteDance alone, each spending over $10 billion. Actually, 100 billion RMB, so $14 billion per company. And then there are another three that are Baidu, Meituan, and Kuaishou are actually over 10 billion RMB in spending alone in 2025.
Wow, the numbers.
So it's a big catch-up.
Okay, let's bring up the results of the poll that I asked in the beginning. If anyone is a polite user of AI. Most of you are polite. Okay, so about 2/3 of the room say thank you to the AI model. So this question is relevant because AI is notorious for consuming a lot of power. Navid, I want to come back to you. You touched on this in the beginning, and you were saying, one of the considerations is the sheer power consumption that goes into powering these data centers. Is that the only consideration?
That's certainly one of the main ones that Marc mentioned. The other one is just in terms of the supply chain dynamics with regards to fitting out a data center has changed dramatically. We are looking at a data center right now which is trying to do an LNG-powered behind-the-meter supply for an hyperscale cloud center, and they went to buy a gas turbine. Only 3 companies in the world that make the gas turbine needed for data centers, Siemens, GE, Innova, and the waiting list is 4 years. So even if they do get the power supply and the land bank suggested, they have to wait for 4 years before they can kick it off. In another transaction, we are involved in the power generators coming from Caterpillar. There's a 9-month waiting list for that.
Right.
There is also another constraint, which is human capital required to deliver these data centers at the right specifications. There are a lot of new players that have entered the space who are traditionally real estate players and are trying to do data centers now. I mean, we're lucky to be partners with people like DigitalBridge and Go Capital who have experience in this. But finding the right capital, human capital to deliver it is a challenge also.
Yeah. I'd like to ask you about the heat that is generated by powering these data centers as well, because from what I understand, you also need to have effective cooling systems in place. Is that acting as a constraint over how quickly you can build up capacity?
It's a huge constraint, because if you think about the conversations in data centers, they often lead to power, which is our #1 constraint as an industry. To be able to find powered land is extraordinarily difficult. And when you look at AI data centers versus standard data centers, from my perspective, there's really 3 main areas where they differ. First is on scale, because an AI data center generally is much larger. Put that in perspective. The data centers that we've built for the last 10 years have been around 36 megawatt buildings. The new ones we're building are 100 megawatt, which sit on gigawatt campuses. Put that in perspective. A 100 megawatt building powers 100,000 homes. So you're using an extraordinary amount of power. So the first issue is scale around is power scale and getting that power available. The second issue is being able to have the capital to scale, which Marc talked about earlier. And then the third issue is around innovation. And that innovation is all around liquid to the chip, or what's called DLC, direct liquid to the chip cooling, which basically, instead of using the technology we've used for 25 years for data centers, which is air-cooled to remove the heat, because power equates to heat, and you have to remove that heat, we use direct liquid to the chip, which is glycol device attached to the GPU, and it removes that heat. That's the technology that allows AI data centers. If this were a data center hall and a standard data center, you'd have 10 racks of AI sitting in the middle of it and all blank space. And at today's modern data centers that we're building, the entire floor would be filled with racks. And so that is really the gating issue that we've looked at for the last 3 years. The claim to fame for GDC is that we're the 3rd largest global data center provider, not including the roll-ups, excuse me, Marc, but standalone data centers, we're the 3rd largest. We've got about $3 billion in revenue, 3,700 employees, 150 countries, 150 data centers in 21 countries. And our claim to fame is that we have 250 megawatts of production liquid to the chip cooling running in our data centers, which outside of the hyperscalers is the greatest amount. And I can tell you, it's been an incredibly steep learning curve, because for 25 years we did it air-cooled, and now all of a sudden we're using this new technology. It's not proven, it's not standardized. And so that, to me, is probably the biggest challenge in our industry, is creating a standard so that we can replicate these data centers in an efficient, standardized manner and drive the cost out.
Yeah, interesting.
Can I just add something to that, which refers to your question earlier about whether there is enough capital available for data centers. And I think for the real estate people who might be in the audience, one of the biggest challenges that real estate investors face when looking at data centers is what happens at the end of the lease. So these data centers, when we invest in it, they'll be rented by Google or AWS for 15 years. And like Doug mentioned, the technology is continuously changing. The efficiency is changing. So if I spend $1 billion on building an 85 megawatt data center, what will happen to it at the end of its life? If I buy a hotel in Park Lane, Mayfair, as a real estate investor, I know that 15 years later it would be worth more than what I bought it for. But with data centers, it's a slightly different calculation, slightly different returns. So that's where the conflict comes in terms of your core data centers.
And it's interesting you say this, because we had this debate in the early 2000s around cell towers. And people said, gee, we're really concerned about the residual value of a cell tower. And what ended up happening was we found out that the location was really important. And the interconnectivity of a mobile network is a part of an ecosystem that's daisy-chained to many other cell sites. And what we're finding with data centers, as you think about the architecture of data gravity and where data goes, these data centers are highly interconnected, not only through their fiber optic networks, but the amount of investment that happens at the core of the network that sits in these, very difficult to pick up $50 million of infrastructure and move it across the street. And so what we found is, again, we've been in the sector for over 10 years. Doug, you've been in it longer than I have. But we've already gone through our first round of renewals of these leases. And what we discovered is churn is less than 100 basis points. Across our global data center portfolio, we have 86 basis points of churn. And the other key thing that we found out is the stickiness of these locations. Rental rates have moved up on average about 22% in the renewal. Now, most of what we modeled is we thought rents would go down. We modeled 3% churn, and we modeled 15% discount on rents. And what we found out is that rents were higher, and the stickiness of these locations was really important.
That's absolutely, location is critical, right? And I think a lot of the new investors in data centers might not realize the importance of Ashburn, Virginia, where 70% of internet traffic passes by. So absolutely right. If you own something there, 15 years later, it will probably be more in demand. But there are a lot of data centers popping up in locations related to AI, language learning models, where one just has to be cognizant of the fact that the location might not be as critical in 15 years as Virginia might be.
Yeah, as Marc aptly pointed out, the guy with the most gray hair up here, 25 years into this, I can tell you that we have recycled our capital through our older assets, and to Marc's point, never had any issues at all. It's been very smooth. We've lost less than 100 basis points on every asset that we've ever recycled. It's been very productive, and it's about how you maintain the infrastructure over time so that you maintain the value of that infrastructure.
You know, Navid, it's very interesting, right? As a real estate investor, I started investing in, at that time it wasn't even called data center. When you were doing a cell tower, we were converting these office buildings in downtown LA and downtown San Francisco into telecom exchanges.
One Wilshire,
right? Those were the telecom exchanges, the predecessor of data center back then. So we always thought, what are the alternative uses of these assets when the lease runs out, or these telecom exchanges or data center get obsolete, right? But they don't get obsolete because it's almost like 3G, 4G, 5G. Every time the pipe expands, there's more content to fill it, right? In telecom terms. So in these data centers, even some of these so-called obsolete or legacy data center, there seem to be more and more actually users because of the lack of latency. So there are more and more applications that are coming up that actually need the lack of latency.
Yeah.
And that interconnection at a data center that he's talking about, those legacy data centers are where those fiber optic cables come together in interconnection.
Correct.
And so as we watch the building of cloud, public cloud, the last 13 years, as Doug said, what was interesting is as the cloud developed and as the cloud moved and proliferated to the edge, these locations became more important because of that connectivity. The same thing is going to happen in inference. Inference will follow the same ball flight as cloud and cloud computing. Why? 90% of AI will sit on your mobile device. Inference, by nature, is going to be near the consumer and is going to be near the device. And that makes these locations, as you start to build these language models and they proliferate into generative AI, real estate becomes more important. And real estate that's close to the connectivity, the customer, the enterprise, and IoT devices.
I just want to ask a question about the power generation. The assumption is that, I guess, most people just assume that it will be generated from renewables somehow. Is it going to be sufficient? Can renewables generate enough power based on your projections of how much demand is needed, how much supply is needed?
I'll take a swing at this because we've been spending the last 2 years working on this. I've been saying this, I think you and I talked down in Brazil about this. We don't have a generation problem. Obviously, China's done a very good job with their generation and their transmission. The challenge in Europe, as we saw on display in Portugal and Spain a couple of weeks ago, is that these grids are aging. These transmission grids were built after World War II. They never contemplated building transmission infrastructure for AI compute. I can guarantee you that was not in the design 60 years ago. And today, on a global basis, data centers are consuming about 60 gigawatts of power. So imagine New York City consumes about 5.5 gigawatts per day. So think about that. That's almost 11x New York City's happening every day in compute, going to 300 gigawatts. So we know that there's 240 gigawatts of power that has to be created to make AI work. That's a big task. And we put that up against a current market construct where essentially the data center industry is turning on about 5 to 6 gigawatts per year. And over the next 5 years, we're going to have to light up 22 gigawatts per year. So you have this massive trade and supply imbalance that's only growing, which is the demand is going from 6 gigawatts to 7 to 9 to 22 per year, and we can only turn on about 6 gigawatts per year. So to your point, the traditional path of how we build power is completely insufficient. We have to throw everything at the problem. It's solar, it's wind, it's hydro, it's, as the speaker before said, gas. Building microgrids, building grid-independent infrastructure is critical to the future of AI. And there's not a one single bullet solution. We've talked about nuclear power that's 6 to 8 years away. We have a real problem, which is how do we get the generation capabilities adjacent or near or into the data center? And this is the challenge that our industry has to deal with over the next 2 to 3 years.
Doug, do you want to weigh in on that as well, just on the sources of power?
Sure. So what's interesting is we had a little debate out in the green room about what those sources of power would be. I'm a big believer in SMRs. And I also am a realist, so I understand that we're going to have to use gas and coal and other alternative forms until we get there. But SMRs have become so proven. They've been on nuclear ships and submarines for years. They're very, very safe. And I think that we'd be naive to believe that we're going to be able to build the grids out without creating microgrids that feed data centers. So I am a big believer, and we are working down the path for integrating SMRs into our portfolio over time. I think they'll be controlled at the microgrid level by the power providers, probably not the data center providers, but we're getting ready because if you look at the other sources, they're diurnal. You don't have sun at night. Wind doesn't blow 24 hours a day. You look at what happened in Spain and Portugal and the issues that occurred there just recently. We've got to be very careful how we approach this issue because today data centers are responsible for 2% of the global power usage. It'll be 10, 12% over time. We don't know what those percentages will be, but it's going to increase dramatically. And so, again, to me, this is the biggest issue facing our industry, and we're spending a lot of time on this issue.
Yeah. Navid, I'm just going to end with you. I'm sure you get approached a lot as an allocator about these types of opportunities. How do you distinguish when you're looking at investments, who the winners are versus the other pitches that come your way?
Sure. I think we're lucky that we started investing in data centers 10 years ago, so we developed quite a few relationships early on. But when we look at a new transaction today, the key factor is location, and location in data center is all about latency and inference. So there are certain locations, whether it's Ashburn, Virginia, London, Frankfurt, Amsterdam, Texas, where it's just having the powered land bank available to build a data center makes it a transaction attractive enough to underwrite. Secondly, what the other change that has happened is we always did data centers that with good credit quality tenants like Amazon, Google, Microsoft. But now they have realized how powerful they are, that when they assign a 15-year lease to our data center, they're creating value. So it's quite important how the lease is structured, how much risk are they passing to us, and how much returns are we generating based on the risk we are taking. So it's a combination of factors, but it's essentially about credit quality of the tenant, lease, and location.
Okay. Thank you for the crisp answer. I'm sure many people will be writing down notes in this room. Panelists, thank you so much. That was really insightful. And thank you for your participation in the poll.
Thank you.
Africa, a region rife with potential for growth and opportunities, but not without its challenges. Bloomberg highlights the biggest stories, interviewing key players, and reporting on the issues impacting the region. Join us as we get to the heart of African business, politics, and economics, and ask the question, what's next?
Please welcome to the stage Owusu Akoto, CEO of FreezeLink, Chilufya Motale Muwila, co-founder and chief visionary officer at eShandy, and Dennis Mwangi, managing partner of Talia Psychotherapy, for a conversation with Bloomberg's Jennifer Zabazaja.
Thank Thank you so much. This is very exciting for all of us here at Bloomberg, for the three of you, for many people who are here. We are launching and unveiling for the first time ever our inaugural Africa Startups to Watch list, 25 Africa startups to watch. There are a number of companies that are here, 3 of which we're going to be speaking to in a minute. Yes, thank you. It's very exciting for us in the region. If you just take a look at this QR code up here, you can see the list of 25 that literally was just unveiled earlier today. We whittled down a list from 2,000 entries that were actually sent to us, and some of these founders are really incredible what they're doing. They're tackling challenges and solutions on the continent, so it's very exciting for us. 9 of the founders are here with us, hopefully some in the room, obviously some in the room, but 3 are on stage with me, and I'm very pleased. Here's some of them that are here with us today. I'm pleased to be able to show the rest of the world really why we picked some of these founders for our inaugural list. So thank you all so much. Let's get right to it. Maybe you all can share a bit more about the inspiration behind your company and really what it was that you were trying to solve for. Koto?
Sure. So I'll start with a quick story of a recent customer of ours. His name is Eric. Farmer Eric grows miracle berries, and miracle berries are a small red berry that is grown only in Western Africa. He exports miracle berries to the US mainly. He sells them on the local market. He was experiencing 60% post-harvest losses. So 60% of everything he grew and purchased from smaller farmers perished because he didn't have the right storage. Moreover, not only was he losing 60%, the remaining 40% he was selling at a discount because of the quality of the produce. So he was selling them on average grade B. So imagine 100% of the harvest. He was realizing the value of only 20% of the harvest. And this moves us at FreezeLink. It has consequences for the health of our countries because we're losing nutrients to the earth. It has consequences for wealth creation, not only for farmers, but also food insecure consumers in Africa. And thirdly, it has consequences for climate. You cannot get in a room a group of Ghanaian farmers without them talking about how the climate is affecting them. They may not use the language of climate change, but they know what it is. And so I'm the son of a farmer. I'm the grandson of a farmer. I was fortunate enough to have a career based in London, working in supply chain for companies like Unilever, Nestle, Red Bull. And I was so wowed about how modern supply chains worked. And it really made me think there has to be a better way. I remember being a child, visiting some of the farms of my family, and there would be so much waste on the floor that it would be a carpet of waste. You would walk on the farm and you would sink a bit. And you also had the sense that the fortunes of the country were also sinking a bit. So FreezeLink is a one-stop shop for cold chain. We exist to eliminate food and medicine waste in Africa through cold chain. If it's cold, we store, we transport, and we build with an engineering team that builds clean energy cold chain for food customers and for healthcare customers too.
Amazing. Thank you for that. Sophia?
So I'll start with some quick facts around why we started Ishandi. We know that over 1.7 billion people across the world have no access to financial services. And in Africa alone, that is around 57% of that population that is affected, around 95 million people. And this is also affecting over 40 million SMEs across sub-Saharan Africa, facing a $330 billion financing gap. These SMEs form the backbone of growing economies. These SMEs form 90% of all businesses in Africa and 60% of all jobs. And yet 80% of them receive no bank financing, particularly women-led and youth-led businesses. He was born to solve this problem. So after 3 years of working as a CEO in one of the leading financial institutions in Southern Africa, I made a bold decision to co-found Ishandi to solve this problem. Ishandi is a credit-led Pan-African challenger bank that is democratizing access to finance to small businesses and individuals across sub-Saharan Africa. We provide microloans, payment services, peer-to-peer lending for investments, microinsurance to historically disadvantaged income groups across sub-Saharan Africa. We are really banking the unbanked and championing financial inclusion.
Thanks so much, Sophia. Dennis.
Morning, everyone. My name is Dennis Mwangi. I'm the managing partner for Thalia Psychotherapy. We started Thalia Psychotherapy because of one main reason. Mental health in Africa is one of the biggest disease burden. It affects close to 300 million people, and unfortunately, close to 95% of them are not getting treatment because most of them don't know they have a mental health issue. When we dug deeper, or what provoked us to basically look into it deeper, was the issue of mental health in the police force. In Kenya, where I come from, majority of the police who were fighting around 2015, we had an issue with Al-Shabaab. So the police that were sent in the front lines to deal with them were coming back with PTSD. Majority of them were killing their family and friends, others were taking the gun onto themselves, and we were looking for a solution or for a way to identify those that we should focus on so that we address the issue. We were able to do that, and from that we basically moved on to now doing it to the broader population. We use SMS and we use basic technology so that even those guys that are in the field or in the bush are able to receive the care they require, and we're able to know who to focus on. So at the moment, what we do is we integrate mental health checks as part of the hospital triage. What you're trying to do is to ensure that any hospital setup or any clinic in Africa can be able to offer mental health services. So that's what we are doing at the moment, our bread and butter. And as it is at the moment, we are doing close to 7 million screening, and we are hoping by the end of this year to have integrated into the national health scheme so that everybody, with every hospital visit, mental health is part of the solution that is being offered.
Thanks so much for that. I think just hearing from all three of you, and if you look at the startup list, very different innovations that we're seeing, health tech, agri-tech, fintech, and it really shows, it goes to show just what we're seeing from the continent and the innovations from the continent. I wonder if you guys can touch on where there are opportunities to scale some of these innovations, and maybe what are the barriers to getting some more startups and companies like yourselves off the ground? Start for us?
Yeah, so we've spoken a lot about AI innovation at this conference. For FreezeLink, we see the innovation on the hardware and the software side. So in terms of hardware, 600 million Africans do not have access to electricity, which is staggering. So the fact that the long-term cost of battery and solar continue to go down, long-term, is a game changer. What it means is that we can build power-intensive assets like cold storage that are solar-powered, and we have, at FreezeLink, we've begun to do that as part of a hub-and-spokes model. The second thing has to do with the innovation in terms of refrigerants. So the topic of refrigerants isn't a very sexy topic, but it matters so much in terms of food security. And there continue to be more innovations in terms of using non-greenhouse emitting refrigerants. And then AI does impact what we do tremendously. So just to give you an example, to build a bespoke modular solar-powered cold storage for agriculture, we need to analyze 77 different variables. Cold chain is complicated. With AI, that process, which takes a small engineering team, can be done in an instant. And this is one of the things that we are working on. And finally, when it comes to what does it take to have more innovators succeed and get along, the first thing I'll say is that Africa is not Silicon Valley. The only similarity is perhaps how we think about what is an ecosystem. So if we think about an ecosystem, normally we talk about risk capital and entrepreneurs, but how about government? How about the private sector? We are here at the behest of Bloomberg as a good example in partnership with the Qatari government. And then thirdly, how about our universities? So there are opportunities that we haven't realized on the continent many of our universities, especially the public ones, are not as strong as we need them to be. So I think the answer is to really think about what is an ecosystem, almost at the table with 5 different legs, and how do we strengthen all of those legs of the table to have a strong ecosystem to build up more innovation.
Sophia, I saw you nodding over there.
Yeah, no, I agree with what he's saying. And also, we do know that in Africa, digital infrastructure is not well fully developed, particularly in emerging markets. And so you find that smartphone penetration is low. So access to internet is also low, as Elon Musk also mentioned in his panel session around how we can improve people's lives by giving people access to internet so that they can get things for free, learn new skills, and all those kinds of things. And so in a market like in emerging markets where 70% of all transactions are through mobile money, that is last mile technology. So it's not about giving everyone access to a smartphone that's going to automatically disrupt everything, but also leverage of how do we apply AI through last mile technology. How do we reach the last mile? How do we reach people in the rural communities so that we can improve the standard of living and make it a fundamental right for everyone to have financial access? So that's where the opportunity lies with last mile technology, mobile money transactions, and the deployment of smart technology, digital infrastructure.
How do you convince, you all are solo founders, how do you, solo founder, right?
Co-founder.
Co-founder, okay, sorry about that. How do you convince as founders, international investors to buy into some of the solutions that you have? Because in some senses, they're very localized. What's the convincing factor? Dennis, has it been a challenge to maybe get investors or people on board?
Yes and no. Right now, the interest on mental health and healthcare in general is very, very high. The issue has been, what do you call it, getting funds away. How do they get returns? That has been the biggest issue for the investors. However, with solutions such as the way we are integrating with the national pair governments, doing things like impact bonds and looking for innovative financing solutions, they are able now to find, what is it called, a liquidity option, and they are now be able to basically come on board. So for me, getting the investors has been a challenge. However, for us, during the beginning, we were afraid of the VCs because we thought, or we still believe, they are going to interfere with the pricing. And when it comes to mental health, part of the challenge is the pricing structure. So we're trying to make as sure as possible the costs remain as low as possible. So back to your question, yes, the interest has been there. No, the challenge has been to ensure they get a liquidity event for them and to ensure that they get the returns they're looking for. So it's a catch-22 situation. And just to close, we are working with the pension schemes in Africa. Right now for them, the biggest issue is on the risk. So we are trying to de-risk healthcare in general for them so that when they invest, they get 2 returns in terms of the social return, in terms of a more secure and more enhanced healthcare system, and number 2, they get a market return on their capital.
Is the perception of risk fair when we think about investing into startups and some of the companies on the continent? Because there is, the risk is very closely associated, right, when we think about investment onto the continent, considering volatility in currencies, and you mentioned governments. Is it fair, though?
Certainly not. I studied in the US. I was lucky to get a scholarship to leave Ghana to study in America. I've lived in London. The amounts of capital that people in those places are able to raise just off a PowerPoint presentation is staggering compared to what I see startups in Africa looking for. And when you look at the human capital that we have in those different places, you can't possibly say that it is fair. That having been said, as an entrepreneur, you need to overcome. Yeah. So, I think that gravitating to investors, even foreign investors, who understand Africa and understand the need for patient capital, and oftentimes who already have made investments in Africa, those are the partners that we have found are the ones for us. So they've almost rejigged their perception of risk through experience in Africa. But for investors who are we've received more interest from more investors in non-traditional places.
Like where?
Like South Africa, the Middle East to an extent. These are investors who are very keen to work with the local investors before they jump in, which is not a terrible idea from my perspective.
And Chilufia, you talk about having that one initial yes, which opened the door to others. Can you share that story?
So we were bootstrapping when we launched our operations in 2019, but we got our metrics right. Our unit economics were well structured, and we understood the business very well. So we had the fundamentals, and we had the numbers right. And so we got a lot of no's. There were very rigid VCs, our traditional financial institutions, that basically had very rigid models, and we got no after no after no, but we really, really persisted and only got one yes. And that yes was in 2020 by Gender Lens Funds based out of the US. So it's very difficult to raise money locally. It's much easier to raise money from the US or the UK or other regions actually than from your local market with people who are with you, who see you on the ground, who see the impact. It's much easier for them to see you operate for 5 years to see if you fail, you succeed. When you're successful, then they come. But at the time when you need them the most, they are not there. That's the unfortunate reality.
But you're seeing more and more interest as you continue to share your story?
So we see more interest from international investors than local investors. And we see more interest from regulators by creating sandboxes that allow us to operate. We innovated with a peer-to-peer platform where we raised over $6 million, more than we raised from international investors from the local market. That kind of alternative finance really are solutions around that startups can use to basically raise money or use it as a bridge round as they raise from international investors. I think it's just the intentionality that really we need to have. We see more interest from DFIs than actual VCs who are more comfortable if you're coming from more developed markets. My experience was that because I'm coming from Zambia, the interest rate we were offered was very, very high because we're deemed high risk. And I was told, well, if you're coming from South Africa or from Kenya or Morocco, it's much easier. We would lend to you at 5% per annum. But coming from a market like Zambia, they're giving it to me at 13% plus the SOFR, which is expensive. And then if I'm going to on-lend that to a small business owner who's struggling, how much interest am I going to charge this customer? So it's really, really unfair. And I understand their macroeconomics are beyond the same and policies, but I think we just have to be intentional around who is the actual beneficial person behind this. Who's the one that's going to receive these funds? It's not the fintech. It's actually the end user who's the SME, who's forming the backbone of the growing economy. So do they need high interest loans to make their businesses grow? No. They also need patient capital. So we need fair pricing, not based on country metrics, but really around what we are solving and the impact.
Dennis, can you jump in?
For me, I'll take a different perspective. For us,
yes,
thank you.
We like the applause.
For us, our focus has not been on the VC money. It's actually been on the end user, on the end customer. They are the ones who have been actually funding us. So for the longest time up to now, we have actually been bootstrapping. We got our first institutional investor last year, and that was basically to allow us to go national. But other than that, we find our biggest investors to be basically the end user, the customers, and they are the best when it comes to everything else, because at the end of the day, I'm not charging interest. And it's a proof of basically the way they love our product, let me put it that way. So at the end of the day, I think the end consumer is the best financier, and that's who has been supporting us all along.
Thanks for that. I want to ask you all how you see the next level of the startup ecosystem growing on the continent. We mentioned you're a part of the 25 startups to watch. There are hundreds of thousands of startups across the continent. Is it patient capital that needs to help continue this momentum to grow and build and maybe one day make the startup ecosystem similar to Silicon Valley? What do you think, Koto?
I think I have 3 answers. Pension funds, pension funds, pension funds.
That's it. Okay, we can go now.
If you look at the performance of DFI-funded startups, objectively, you have to conclude that it hasn't worked. And anybody can look this up, do their research on Google. At the same time, our pension funds across Africa sit on trillions of dollars. And, is odd, because last year I went to Egypt for the first time, and I was talking to some investors, and they were talking about how they were trying to work with Egyptian insurance companies and pension funds to increase their investments in alternative assets. And I remember getting feeling a sense of deja vu, because they were the same types of conversations I've been privy to in Ghana. And so there is, from my perspective, an increase in momentum with challenging pension funds to fund alternative asset classes, including private equity and venture capital. So however you look at it, you cannot get around the fact that, we have an ecosystem with risk capital providers who are dominated by outsiders, which in and of itself is not bad, but the absence of that local capital, which is more affordable capital, which also comes with a degree of local expertise and door opening, that is conspicuously missing in the way that you do see in Silicon Valley.
So it's more of a local issue that you think needs to be addressed?
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you agree, Sophia?
I agree, and there's a saying in Africa that we're building camels and not unicorns. And so what you find is people are building more resilient businesses. They're looking for alternative ways to survive and growing and thriving in very harsh conditions. So you find that you have more camels than unicorns. And what you also find is more collaborations with corporate institutions and startups as well. And we see a lot more of mergers and acquisitions where larger fintechs that have raised more money are not able to expand further will start acquiring smaller startups that have built the traction, the scale, but haven't been able to raise sufficient funding. So we'll see more collaborations, acquisitions, and more camels.
And I actually spoke with someone earlier today who said, in China, I believe in 2008, there were no unicorns, and it slowly grew. So maybe that's not the trajectory that every continent, every country needs to take, and we should be a bit more diversified. I wonder, Dennis, what your take is on that.
Absolutely. In fact, from what she's talking about, collaboration, I believe, will be the biggest financing option for most startups, especially with corporates. Majority of us basically pay on a cash basis. So you can imagine the cash, the cash demand on the business. So if you're able to get credit terms for maybe 40, 60 days, 180 days, it becomes a very important financing option to many startups. And if you de-risk some of these things so that, for example, the big players, for example, in the earlier conversation, somebody talked about the supermarket, giving opportunity to the... So if you do those end-to-end solutions so that the market is able to absorb this and they're able to basically support the end user, and we provide the supermarket, for example, with a de-risking option so that we are able to deliver, the ecosystem in totality will grow together. So those kind of things are what we are supposed to be looking at. And in totality, what he's talking about, the pension scheme, is also very important because local capital understands the local problem and the local solutions which are available, and it becomes cheaper at the end of the day. So it's a multitude of basically the pension scheme and getting the local corporates to basically support the players in the industry, yes.
Let's just finish off on each of your messages to people who maybe you're talking about local capital and local knowledge of the solutions. For those who are not sitting locally, I wonder what you would say to convince people to care, to value what it is that you're championing. Can you start for us?
So I'll quickly say that, Africa as a continent, we have so much low-hanging fruit. But on top of low-hanging fruit, we will have a quarter of the world's population in no time at all. In 2021, I received a call that made us the first company in the world to distribute the COVAX vaccines. And it was picked up by the New York Times and other international press. So the point is that it doesn't require, so much of our innovation has been, the destination is clear. There are opportunities to leapfrog what other companies and countries have gone through by virtue of some of the things we discussed before. And you cannot ignore the numbers that Africa comprises. The last thing I'll say is that in a world where the climate is changing, and in many African countries, the average African spends 40% of their income on food. Some of these basic necessities that all the other panelists have spoken about, it's not the case that the demand is not there. So there is sometimes a first mover advantage which is ours to seize.
Chilafia, do you want to close us out?
Yes, I would say to the teams and the people, the institutions that are deploying capital, if we can only be more intentional about why we're deploying the capital, and if the value really is about impact, really be intentional, and also get to see where the money actually goes. And to the people that are then deploying this capital that is being received, we need to talk less and do more. Yeah.
Dennis, do you want one more?
Sure. Basically, I'll end with this. There's no health without mental health. And to basically say the risk that you believe is there in Africa is not there. It's just that you're looking at it from a different perspective.
Thank you so much for that. I really think we should give these guys a round of applause. And I wanted to note before we do go, we do have the G20 in South Africa later this year, and in the lead up to the G20 and the B20, we are excited to announce, again, the inaugural Africa Business Forum that will be hosted by us on November 17th and 18th in Johannesburg. We'll convene a number of Africa's most influential voices to discuss some of these issues we've been able to speak about today and the future. So please scan the QR code. Please come if you will be around, but we hope that you will be, and we hope you continue to engage with us. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Well, everybody, as we come to the close, can you believe it, of the 2025 Qatar Economic Forum, I would like to extend our thanks to all of our speakers and my fellow moderators from Bloomberg, and to everyone here today and over the last couple of days for your thoughtful contributions to the conversation. It has been our utmost pleasure to host you here in Doha for 3 days of intensive, inclusive, and forward-looking dialogue filled with meaningful discussions and spirited debate. We would also like to express our sincere appreciation to our official partners, Qatar Ministry of Commerce and Industry, Qatar Media City, our culture sponsor, Qatar Museums, our innovation sponsor, Qatar Research Development and Innovation Council, our premier sponsors, Qatar Investment Authority, Qatar National Bank, our knowledge sponsor, McKinsey & Company, our participating sponsors, IDA, HSBC Investment Promotion Agency, Qatar, Qatar Financial Center, Qatar Free Zones Authority, Qatar University, our airline sponsor, Qatar Airways, and our connectivity sponsor, Ooredoo, plus our tourism sponsor, Visit Qatar. Now, to watch any of these sessions again, please visit the Qatar Economic Forum YouTube channel. Every single one of these sessions is uploaded there. And there's not much more to say apart from thank you again for joining us. And by the way, we look forward to seeing you back in Doha next year on May 12th to 14th for the 2026 Qatar Economic Forum powered by Bloomberg. We hope to see you again. Thank you very much. Shukran.